Welcome back to Law and Crime Trial Network. A judge just called a short break in Tammy Moore's trial in South Carolina. They should be back in about 10 to 15 minutes. In the meantime, we are showing you a live picture out of Ohio where a jury has reached a verdict in Carl Wimpey Jr.'s case. You may recall Wimpey charged with killing a man during a bar fight back in January. That victim, Daniel Vasquez, was injured when he tried to step into the fight. He actually had intervened. Carl Wimpey had actually been fighting with Daniel Vasquez's nephew, but Daniel Vasquez intervened. Prosecutors say Carl Wimpey punched him in the head several times very hard. Wimpey and his friends left the bar. They went back inside the bar after the other people in the fight threw some bottles at their car, and Wimpey hit Daniel Vasquez one more time with a really hard hook to the face. Daniel Vasquez was taken off life support several days later and died. Wimpey testified in his own defense in this case. He says it was self-defense, that he was in fear for his own safety and for the safety of his friends. Again, a jury has reached a verdict, and we're now just waiting for everyone to file into the courtroom to see whether they decided he is in fact guilty of murder. In the meantime, I want to bring in my guest that I have with me live this afternoon via Skype, and that is Natalie Jackson, criminal defense attorney. She's joining us from the Orlando area. So Natalie, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
So while we wait for the jury to come in and read their verdict in the Carl Wimpey Jr. case, I want to talk to you about Tammy Moore a little bit and how so far you are interpreting her testimony. She's been rather cool and calm and collected on the stand. She has been talking a lot, perhaps too much, at least her attorney seemed to think so when he reminded her earlier this afternoon. That's okay, I know you want to give the details, but you let me ask the question. What is your overall assessment so far of how she's been doing since she took the stand?
I agree with you. I think she's been very cool, collected. I do think that she needs to let her attorney do the work here. She's volunteering a lot of information that is superfluous, so I'm not sure, how that will work in her favor. She comes off very calculated and calm.
I mean, she also comes off, I don't know if this is the right word, but almost a little nonchalant. I mean, she just testified that this case hasn't impacted the family. We don't talk about this case. It's not part of our life. I mean, how is that possible when this has been going on now for almost 5 years, or more than 5 years, right? And her husband, is in jail. I mean, how could this not have been impacting the family? I mean, that in itself I find hard to believe.
Yeah, I do too. And I think that, one of the things about her being so calm and, not caring, that jury can take that two different ways. They can take it in the way that, maybe she's overly practiced, or maybe she just doesn't care. And she didn't care about, Miss Elvis being kidnapped or killed either.
Yeah, I mean, it seems at least like she feels like good about this. She doesn't seem nervous at all. Ask me what you want. Do you think there'll be any, big moments during the cross-examination? I mean, will the prosecutors really be able to go after her effectively?
Well, I think this comes into where the prosecution and the defense is different. Prosecution have different ethical codes, so they can't really provide information that's not there. Neither can the defense, but that happens a lot when the defense is examining or cross-examining. But prosecution has to be very careful. They can only talk about what they can really prove. So here, there's some issues about the affair and, what may have happened with the affair, the pregnancy test, all of that. But prosecution can't guess. They have to know.
Yeah, since I had brought up her family before and the fact that she just testified a few moments ago that no one in her family talks about this case and it hasn't affected them, I just want to talk about the little twist yesterday, the bumps in the road for the defense team. Several of Tammy Moore's children were to testify, but when it became apparent they were watching the live stream of the trial in the sequestration room, the judge said, you know what, they were not supposed to be doing that, and now they can't testify. Do you think that really hurt the defense case? I mean, we don't know exactly what they would have said, but how much of a setback is that?
It depends on the alibi information that they could have given. She's testified that she was with her children So I do think that this has set the defense case back a lot as far as just providing her an alibi and also talking about credibility through family is how you kind of sneak in things like you sneak in a lot of character evidence, even though it's not admissible, but you do sneak it in through family. And so I do think not having her children testify, which could also play on the jury's sympathy, can hurt her a lot. And I'm sorry that they did that. That's a consequence of not following the rules.
Right, right. I mean, it's seemingly something so minor, and probably, you know, they said, oh, it's fine. Who knows what they were thinking? But is it unusual, you know, for the judge to say, you know, that then they just can't testify at all?
Let me tell you, striking a witness on a case like this is pretty unusual. Yeah. So I do think that, you know, this is very egregious, and I guess, you know, they were caught red-handed. And for them to think that they could do this after being given instructions by a judge, it kind of says something about them and how they feel about the law and upholding the law.
Yeah, well, good point, Natalie. So just to remind our viewers, the judge has called a short break in Tammy Moore's trial. In the meantime, we are waiting for a verdict to be read in the Ohio courtroom where Carl Wimpey Jr. is facing murder charges for murdering Daniel Vasquez in a bar fight back in January. While we wait on both of those, we do want to take a quick minute to review today's top crime stories. So that was Carl Wimpey Jr. testifying in his own defense. He is charged with murdering Daniel Vasquez in a bar fight they got into with several other people back earlier this year in January. This was at Brujas in Erie Township, Michigan. I have a guest with me live, Natalie Jackson, criminal defense attorney, who's joining us via Skype from the Orlando area. So, Natalie, while we wait to hear this verdict, I first want to ask you, was it the right move, in your opinion, for Carl Wimpey Jr. to take the stand and tell his side of the story?
You know, it's always up to the defendant for that. Most of the time, it's a bad move for the defendant to tell his story, especially in something like this. But when his story is self-defense, he kind of has to take it to tell why he felt in fear. So I think in this case, you know, it was probably a smart thing to talk about why he was in fear and why he felt the need to go back into the bar.
Right. I mean, that is a big issue in this case. If he was in fear when he and his friends left the first time, why didn't they just take off in their car and go? Well, what happened was Anthony Richter, who Wimpey had been fighting with, threw a few bottles at the vehicle that Wimpey was in. He then got angry, then went, Arthur Richter, he then got angry, went back inside and started fighting again. So yeah, that is a big question. If he really was that scared, why didn't he leave? I mean, the other thing is, we see him on the stand, he's obviously a big guy, you know, he's over 6 feet tall, he's about 300 pounds, he's double the size, you know, almost, of the guy who he was fighting, Arthur Richter, and Arthur Richter had his arm in a sling. Remember, Arthur Richter is the nephew of Daniel Vasquez, who was killed in all of this. So does that make it hard to believe that he, you know, feared for his safety when he's so much bigger than the other guy in the fight?
Let me tell you, there are a lot of things that are against Mr. Wimpey in this case, and size is definitely one of them when you're talking about self-defense in a fight. Also, the fact that he did return to the bar when he was in a vehicle and he could have left if he was in fear of his safety. So I think that those are huge obstacles that the defense had to get over, and I'm not sure that they did by the timing of this verdict.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we will see. I mean, it was a relatively short trial, 3 days. It looks like, nope, still no action yet in that courtroom. So while we wait for the verdict and while we wait for the Tammy Moore trial to resume, let's go back and listen to a little bit more of Wimpey Jr.'s testifying. You decide. You think it was the right move for him to go and tell his side of the story. Well, there you have it, folks. The jury has acquitted Carl Wimpey Jr. of murder and of the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. They did find him guilty of assault, but we see him very emotional right there. No doubt this is a huge relief for him. He was breaking down in tears and grabbing on to his attorney as the verdict was read in this case. This is a surprise, I think, to a lot of people who had predicted that he would be convicted of murder. Moore. He had alleged all along that this was in self-defense. The reason that he hit Daniel Vasquez while they were all in this big bar brawl was that he feared for his safety and the safety of his friends. Apparently, jurors bought that argument. Live with me is Natalie Jackson, criminal defense attorney, joining us via Skype. Natalie, we are going to take a break in just a moment, but first I want to get your thoughts on the verdict.
Yeah, my thoughts on the verdict. I thought he would be guilty of the felonious assault. I thought murder was a little bit of a stretch because usually when you don't have a weapon and you're using your hands, it's a bar fight. That's a little bit of a stretch for juries to convict someone of murder.
Okay, well, it makes sense. That is how they found him. Not guilty of murder, not guilty of voluntary manslaughter, but guilty on the felonious assault charge. When we come back, we will bring you back live into the South Carolina courtroom where Tammy Moore is still on the stand testifying in her own defense. I'm not sure whether or not we will see cross-examination this afternoon. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, much more live here on the Law and Crime Network. Stay with us. We will be right back after this short break. Okay, welcome back. As you can see, Tammy Moore still going through a long list of cell phone records, hers and her husband Sydney's. We just heard her say about 3:20 in the morning, the day that Heather went missing, that her husband was on a call with Heather. My guest, Natalie Jackson, still with us, criminal defense attorney via Skype. Natalie, I mean, it could seem like a lot of minutia, literally going line by line through these phone records, but obviously this is important for the defense.
Yes, Stacey. This is really important because what they're trying to establish is an alibi for the defendant, for Tammy. So here, the phone records are really important because they give us a timeline of when Heather was last heard from, who she spoke to. Now we know that it was to Tammy's husband, and Tammy actually even admits that she walked in on him talking to Heather, and she told him, you know, she was kind of upset. So I think this stuff is really important to establish that Tammy was not there, and we have phone records from her sister also that talk about. During the time that Heather allegedly went missing, that Tammy she had actually texted Tammy and talked to her. So I think phone records are going to play a very important part in this trial.
Yeah, absolutely. Phone records, text messages, Facebook messages, all of it. We're going to take a quick break. Thank you for that, Natalie. When we come back, we're going to take you back live. Much more to come in the Tammy Moore trial. Stay with us. Well, there you have it. Tammy Moore wrapping up her direct testimony under questioning from her attorney, saying this is the first time in nearly 5 years since Heather went missing that she's had a chance to give her side of the story, to plead innocent. She said that, you know, she wants Heather to be found. She wants Heather to be justice, and she believes investigators really botched this case and that it's their fault. Let me bring in Natalie Jackson, criminal defense attorney, who's still with us via Skype. So that was almost like Tammy Moore's little closing argument, if you will, on the stand. Do you think she made a convincing case?
I think that, you know, everyone reacts differently. I think she did make a convincing case in the fact that there are no records with her. One of the things that I felt may not have been as convincing was when she said that she didn't go into a rage or she wasn't upset when she found her husband on the phone with Heather, Elvis. I think that the juries might question that, but I think on the whole, she did a really good job on the stand. She kept her composure. She answered the questions. She answered seemingly truthfully. And I do think that this is, you know, this case, they don't really have a whole lot of evidence against her.
Yeah, I mean, and to your point, she says she didn't fly into a rage or get upset. I mean, that might be a bit questionable to some jurors. Remember, earlier today, she said she was only mad at her husband for 72 hours when she found out about the affair. I mean, that raised a lot of eyebrows for sure. So perhaps at some times she's seeming almost too cool, calm, and collected as she recounts the story. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, much more live as the cross-examination of Tammy Moore gets underway. Stay with us. Well, it is just getting good in the South Carolina courtroom where the cross-examination of Tammy Moore has begun. I want to bring Natalie Jackson, my guest, back on, criminal defense attorney who's been with us live via Skype this afternoon. So, Natalie, interesting, right? During her direct, she said repeatedly that she was only mad at her husband 72 hours. It wasn't that big of a deal, right, when she found out about the affair. But now we hear the prosecutor reading text messages to friends in which she said she'll never forgive him, she'll never love him again. You know, how do we juxtapose those two explanations?
The prosecution is doing a great job in tearing down her veneer and her mask because, I mean, the prosecution has caught her in many misstatements already. She testified that she called Heather Elvis on the phone, and she didn't know if it was a man or a woman when she called.
Right.
And the person hung up on her. I mean, this is just incredible the way the prosecution is able to use her own words against her.
And quickly, before we have to go, what about this contentious relationship between the prosecutor, Nancy Livesay, and Tammy Moore? Tammy calls her Nancy. She says, excuse me, have we ever met outside of this courtroom? When did we get onto a first-name basis? I mean, is that unusual?
It's very unusual, but it's also unusual for defendants to talk directly to the jury and tell the jury how bad the prosecution is after them. So
right. She said, this woman, you've made my life hell, you know. So I think that sort of vibe between them is definitely going to be interesting to watch. Listen, Natalie, thank you so much for being with us live this afternoon. We do appreciate it. Thanks to all of our viewers for tuning in. I'm signing off. Aaron Keller will be coming up next. Stay with us. Much more from the Tammy Moore trial coming up.